everyone, and thank you for joining the Even Load Catchment Partnership for our Voices of the River webinar. I'm Jennifer Lanham with the Cotswold National Landscape, and my co-host is Sam Frith from Earthwatch. We will be recording this session for our digital library on YouTube, so please turn your video off if you prefer not to be recorded. There will be time for questions at the end of Tim's presentation, but do feel free to put them in the chat at any point. Tim Field is the founder facilitator of the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster, a group of 135 farms covering 40,000 hectares with a common mission towards landscape scale regeneration of the farmed environment. With a background in freshwater ecology, environmental consultancy, and rural surveying, Tim has delivered strategic environmental and infrastructure management of estates, farms, and throughout the food supply chain, including 16 years working in the North East Cotswolds. Tim is also a founder and board member of Ecology, a knowledge exchange platform for disseminating best practice and research on practical, sustainable farming. He is also project director of pioneering North East Cotswold Landscape Recovery Project. And since 2021, Tim has been developing a carbon question, which is a partnership with the Rothamsted Research Institute that provides cost-effective, rigorous soil organic carbon baseline sampling of agricultural soils. Today, Tim will be speaking on regenerative farming in the Cotswolds, vision, opportunities, and stewardship. Welcome, Tim.
Good afternoon, Jen. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Really looking forward to this.
Well, no, I'm very honoured to be invited, of course, and following in the likes of Tony's footsteps. Hopefully, I can do this justice and at least maintain the audience and not lose too many members. So shall I cut to the chase and crack on? Share my screen.
Absolutely, please do share your screen.
Hopefully I get the right one. Let's not skip ahead. Slideshow. I think we're off, aren't we? Can you see that?
Looks good.
Brilliant. So yes, my name is Tim Field. Jen, thanks very much for that introduction. It's embarrassing when you hear back what I've clearly written somewhere, LinkedIn or somewhere.
Magic.
And I think, is that really me? But yes, I've been in the Cotswolds for, well, I was about 40 years. So it is very close to my heart. I've worked in the valley, in the Evenlode Valley, for the last 20-ish years, and caught trout in that river a long time ago, and still try occasionally. And now even my son's trying. But it's great to be able to talk a little bit about my passion, which is the farmed environment, and not just the food it produces, but all the other wonderful things that can come off it. And so with that interest, after 14 years as an in-house environmental consultant on a farm in the Cotswolds, I then left to set up the project with Rothamsted in soil carbon baselining, but also at the same time recognised this sort of groundswell group of local farms that wanted to do more collaboratively and navigate some of the challenges that farming has nowadays in input costs, poor prices, but also recognise some of the opportunities to work together to improve connectivity of habitats, access new markets, and just generally for our own mental health, well-being and enjoyment of the landscape, get together, look at each other's farms, occasionally have a beer, and learn from one another. So that's what we did. And back in COVID times, over 3.5 years ago, we all got together in Farm Ed. Whilst half of Farm Ed was still a building site, the other half they managed to open during COVID. And we socially distanced for a sort of brainstorming of ideas amongst landowners and farmers, both across the Evenlode and the Windrush catchment. And this is what we came out with. Lots of post-it notes, lots of great ideas, lots of aspiration and motivation. But hence why I'm talking here. It was all around the landscape scale regeneration of the farmed environment. And we can do that not just by chewing the fat and kicking tires and exchanging ideas, but also getting into projects together, understanding what our baselines are, benchmarking against one another. And data ultimately is a great platform for knowledge. And then, of course, market entry and so on. So broadly, we set about with a few objectives. Everything begins and ends with soil health. You can't do anything as a food producer unless you've got nice, healthy soils. So that's where we started. Of course, we've got some wonderful habitats in the Evenlode Valley in the catchment. So understanding what those are, mapping them, understanding their condition, and then aspiring to link some of those and what it takes to link those habitats. We can't carry on the way we are in farming without thinking a little bit more entrepreneurially. Traditional selling of commodity crops, taking a BPS payment, that's a payment we used to get per acre for basically not breaking the law. It was a bit of a market leveler as we entered commodity markets. But in my opinion, quite rightly, just getting a payment for not actually improving your land or building business resilience didn't seem quite right for the public purse. So the shake-up of the public subsidies with environmental land management by Michael Gove a few years ago did yield this sort of three-tier approach to subsidies. Something called sustainable farming incentive, which is effectively the what every farmer should go for, in my opinion. Then you have the next step up, which is countryside stewardship. That's remained fairly similar. And then the final step for the most aspirational farms and areas is the landscape recovery. I'll come back to all of those things, but ultimately the farms, as they existed before, were not going to survive with the shake-up of policy and challenging market pressures. So it requires entrepreneurial thinking. With that, and with the nudge from the public sector and the dwindling budget, as we've discovered another 100,000 off the budget for farming just been announced, but also the ever mounting costs, is married with an opportunity in the private investment world. So whether that's through the food supply chain and doing things slightly different to gain a better premium, or through other ecosystem services or nature-based solutions for problems that the landscape and the wider world are facing. So be it carbon capture, natural flood management and floodwater retention, improvements in water quality, improvements in water resilience, so making sure we're drought tolerant, and reversing the collapse of ecosystems and wildlife and biodiversity. None of this is possible unless you are measuring and baselining, but also evaluating against that benchmark, against that baseline. So having data collected, but also evaluating that is hugely important. And as we know from the ECP's great work, the only way that a lot of this is possible is actually by engaging with the community and understanding how we could better improve relations with anything from public access to opportunities to work on farms, to buy direct. It all revolves around community engagement. So there was consensus on those objectives 3.5 years ago, and that's where we set off. So I'm just going to skip through a few of the projects to demonstrate how we've extended on those objectives, and then very much open to questions on those and any of the rationale behind what we do. The first project we got going on was a really nice test bed of how the farmed environment could be improved. The adoption of regenerative farming techniques very much key to that. But there are other opportunities. It's not just about how you plough or how you use cover crops, how you graze your stock. It's also what you're doing in the field corners. It's also about how you manage your infrastructure. And the Lynham subcluster, as we called it, habitat creation project, farming protected landscape sponsored project. We basically brought together a bunch of existing subsidy schemes, countryside stewardship schemes, and knitted them together so they're better connected to their neighbours. But also, we really looked for opportunities to improve the connectivity, but also reduce the impact of farming operations. And this is a nice little demo of some of the things that we've done. On the bottom left corner, this is Priory Farm. Everything that we don't want to see on a field of winter crops is that soil scarring. That was actually not necessarily created by a lot of compaction or a lot of bad cropping, but a bit of failed infrastructure up at the top of the field that we identified, put up a field corner bund, and there it is in the top of the screen, collecting stormy water and stopping it from scarring and running across the top of the field, as is the bottom left. What's also apparent in that top photo, the field corner bund, tiny little pond there, is the clover. And you might be able to make out the stubbles that clover is growing through. This was a small field at Priory Farm where they tried a few new techniques, and this was an AHDB sponsored trial of what's called green manures or green mulch, living mulch, clover undersown in a crop of barley, I think that was, so that you've always got continuous cover in the field, so that the likes of that bottom left-hand picture don't happen. And of course that adds value through soil conditioning, breaking up the soil, the plough pan with the deep rooting clovers. It flowers, provides pollen and nectar resource for pollinators. It's also providing a bite for the small flock of sheep that they've now got at Priory Farm, and it's capturing carbon as well, of course. So it's how these regenerative farming systems. It's not just about how you crop, it's also about what you're doing with your infrastructure, and hopefully that demonstrates it there. At the top right, there's a field edge at Castle Barn, which is also next door to Priory Farm up by Lynham. And where that was, what am I doing here? Sorry, back we go. Where that was farming arable up to the hedgerow, taking that field edge out, put in trees, and where you can see that's actually orchard planting, where you can see it's been cut. That has been cut 3 times, I think, that year to cut and remove the fertility from the previous, I think that was actually grass clover lay. And a green hay crop has been spread on that field in that row. And last year it was a sea of oxeye daisies and knapweed and birdsfoot trefoil and all sorts of wonderful flowering meadow species. So more for the pollinators, benefiting obviously the fruiting trees. And providing a wonderful buffer with that hedgerow edge as well for those species, the hares and so on that need that cover. I'm probably losing complete track of time here. I should go through faster, but there we go. Other things, well, slowing the flow. So Anne Barclay in the ECP deployed some of their budget to put some Woody Debbie dams in and just slow that flow in the stormwater. And we deployed some FIPL money for pond creation as well, as you see bottom right. And the way that we can do this efficiently and effectively is use the skills and the teams that we've got on these farms. So there was one particular digger driver that did all the work on the machine work. There's a guy with a chainsaw license and that did all the Woody Debbie dams. But also optimizing where we put these things so that the cost of creation isn't too high. And the pond here, a very wet corner of the field, it took very little to move some soil around. It's retained water year round and provided a wonderful piece of habitat in what was otherwise a pretty unproductive field edge. Moving on swiftly. So as I mentioned, data is everything. And with my interest in the soil carbon world and Rothamsted, we deployed the technology that we've developed and the stratified sampling plan across 17,000 hectares, which you can see it mapped there. And nearly 700 fields were surveyed to 2 depths for their soil carbon. And that's stratified by soil type, by land use, and by the technology that we've used to analyze the soil carbon. We built on that data set. We're now up to close to 20,000 hectares that's been surveyed, probably 1,000 fields. And that has been done in such a way that we can get 95% confidence on the soil carbon stock in that field is within 10% of the actual result. And that is the requirement then to enter into a lot of these sort of soil carbon trading opportunities, Verra certification, and so on. So the way that we've developed this piece of technology, it requires a large landscape area to get that efficiency of sampling. But also what you can do there is compare how your farm is performing versus the other farms locally. You can't do that if you don't have the data from the neighbouring farms, but also the type of soils you've got, the type of farming system you've got. But with the overall data that we pulled together, you can then get your benchmark. And as you can see from this Ditchley slide, you can see where your top performers are on the left-hand side. The arable is the orange, and the green is the permanent pasture, and where your poorer performers are. And that Potter's field, which is the poorest performing arable field, is going on for sort of 35, 40, maybe even 45 tons below what we would expect to find in that soil type for that land use. And that means that the farmer can then really channel the interventions, the regenerative farming interventions, to pump prime those soils, or even change land use altogether, maybe go into woodland, maybe go into grassland permanently. It's just informing with some empirical evidence the right decisions for that farm in the circumstances. We then took that soil carbon data set with some Environment Agency funding, again with Rothamsted, and also a project with Oxbury Bank looking at how loans and lending can be effectively underwritten by natural capital increase, or so de-risking that borrowing because of the foreseen benefits in nature-based solutions and resilience for the farm. So we explored different regenerative techniques that would pump prime some of those poorer performing fields into healthier soils, more carbon stored, and better performance, better business resilience. And no, those sheep have not escaped. They are supposed to be there. That is a winter crop, and this is at Dunthorpe with Tim Coates, and Carl the shepherd flicks the sheep across that winter crop. It eats out all the fast-growing diseased leaves that have formed in the autumn and early winter, negating any fungicide treatment, and that light browsing that goes on actually stimulates deeper root growth or more root growth. It channels the energy into the roots, and so those plants are then really set for a better charge when the weather turns in spring, and they can go forward. That's better, deeper rooting, better rootstock, more carbon stabilized in the soils as well, and also better water retention, better water availability as those root structures are improved. And so and of course the sheep and the droppings and so on, leaving something behind as well. It does take a lot of intensive knowledge and skills to do this. It's not worked every time. They've had a couple of things backfire, and some a cold snap when the sheep were on the winter rape made them hungry, and the sheep stayed there for perhaps half a day or a day too long, and so yes, there was a hit on a particular field edge, but we learn from these things, and anecdotally so far the performance of the crop has far outweighed the cost of any losses, and of course there's less inputs, which is always desirable. The photo in the middle here, another example of the farm cluster member. This is Fir Farm, showing us a crop of long stem barley there. We're going off for malting, I think, with the Oxford distillery. Is that what it's called? And that's another way of reducing the inputs is using some of these heritage grains that don't require the inputs that the modern varieties do. Lower yielding, but lower inputs, better gross margin in some instances. That's what we're aiming for. And also these new emerging or improving markets for things like heritage flowers and the local distilleries. They want this more complex flavour, more interesting grains. And then the top right is a picture of an agroforestry field up at Dalesford, and that's a chicken coop. I actually did that probably 7 years ago. And you can currently see here, but creating that sort of vertical productivity. Those are actually alder trees, but we also planted 800 apple trees. So you're getting a crop from that vertical production, but also shading, better ranging conditions for chickens. Better ranging means less potential parasite burden and better health condition, better livestock condition. And also in terms of intercepting flow pathways and capturing more water, capturing carbon, lots of benefits from that. So we took all of these different scenarios of regenerative farming, we plugged them into the modelling that Rothamsted have done in the past. We can predict what the uplift of soil carbon is going to be using that modelling, and then we can verify it by substituting space for time with some of the other samples that we've taken across the cluster. And we can start to build this map of you go down this regenerative journey, you're increasing the soil carbon, you're increasing the soil health, you're retaining more water, and you're building a more resilient business. Other projects on the neighbouring catchment, the Windrush Floodplain Meadow project, we baselined 500 hectares of floodplain meadow across, I think it's 41 farms. The Windrush has got a really wonderful sort of what's the word? They're holding on to some wonderful floodplain meadow, ancient meadows still in that catchment where farming practices have actually lost most of those in the even load and further afield. So the Windrush has got the few remaining floodplain meadow MG4 communities, and so mapping those and trying to connect them and just trying to tweak a few management practices so that we can optimize and really restore some of these wonderful meadows. That's Great Burnett you see in the middle photo and the left photo where which is the signature of that MG4 community. On the left, you've got Devil's Bit scabious, those blobs of blue. And on the right, that's a sediment map, piece of astroturf, so we can measure what the input of nutrient is from flooding, capturing the silt as it floods the field and then the tide drops away, and then measuring the phosphate loading that's coming from that flood water. So we can look at the viability of trying to establish some of these meadows, because if it's a high phosphate loading, you're going to struggle to create some of these meadows. Although floodplain meadow can tolerate higher levels of phosphate in the soils than the calcareous equivalent. And that shows the extent. So really trying to join up some of these fragmented habitats, looking at some of the historical data, identifying where some of the old ones were with tithe maps and so on. And that strategy is now just about to be released. And that data that we took from the soil carbon project, so the slide seems to have jumped around. This is what I was talking about, predicting the uplift over 2, 5, 10, 20 years. So I'm just moving. Yes, it is 20 years. And predicting what would happen to that soil carbon profile through different interventions, whether you're improving the grass sward or going for an unimproved grass sward. And we also did it for introducing 4-year arable lays into an 8-year arable rotation. So wheat, oats, oilseed rape, back to wheat, spring barley, whatever, and then a 4-year herb-rich lay. How does the soil carbon respond in that? And so once we've taken that data and we understand how the soil health is responding, plugging that data into something called NFM Studio, which some of you may be familiar with, and that predicts the hydrology and the behavior of the hydrology through storm events in the even load catchment, and how certain natural flood management interventions can flatten the peak, can reduce the intensity of some of those storms in terms of flooding. One of those parameters is soil. So if you improve, there's a scientist called Andy, I'm going to say Andy Gray. Is it Andy Gray? From Rothamsted. That's annoying that I can't remember his name. Who is often cited that if you increase the soil carbon by 1% in a silty clay loam, you have a corresponding water retention capacity of 354 cubic meters. Now, obviously, there's lots of variables in that, and but it's more of an indicative number that to say, if you're improving your soil organic carbon, you are going to be storing more water. Now, it's not that simple as well when it comes to natural flood management. There's surface runoff, there's feeding groundwater and springs popping up everywhere. But the very nature of regenerative farming and the nature of cover cropping, reducing the compaction on your soils, reducing the movement of soils, and reducing the intensity of grazings, and moving livestock around faster, enabling swards to respond and regenerate faster, is decompacting the soil. It's improving infiltration rates, but also that surface layer, that vegetation cover, is also going to have an impact on the surface flow and the runoff of water into our ditches, streams, and rivers, and flatten that flood peak. So whilst there's plenty of cynics that would say it's not as simple as 1% increase will store 354 cubic meters of water, the very nature of regenerative farming is going to recharge those aquifers for drought, and it's going to slow the flow down into the channels and off down to flood Oxford, Abingdon, and London. So we've taken that empirical evidence from Rothamsted, we plugged it into the natural flood management NFM Studio with Atkins, and we've started to parameterize some of the numbers that come out of NFM Studio to try and refine it, try and make it more accurate, so that we can begin to persuade and build confidence in potential flood markets that part of the solution is going to be in how we manage the landscape and manage the landscape soils. So on to landscape recovery, which is really, nowadays, it's our flagship project. It brings a lot of this work together. Landscape recovery, going back to my description of the environmental land management schemes that DEFRA announced several years ago under Michael Gove. It's the top tier and most ambitious, most extensive option in the funding, public funding. There's a couple of key elements to it. One is that you are effectively going into a land use change. You're really taking the foot off the throttle of that landscape. You're looking for a step change in what that landscape is going to do. And the second one is that they have aspirations to blend the finance. So it's not just public purse that's funding all this, but there is an element of private finance as well. So these new and emerging markets in green finance and nature-based solutions will be underpinning or matching the funding from the public purse. And with the nature crisis that we've got and the stress on the public purse that we've got, my personal opinion is that we really need landscape recovery to pave the way for more finance to flow into landscapes. And that doesn't have to just be from people, I don't know, Ryanair offsetting its carbon footprint by buying a load of tree carbon that's planted in even load. That's a very hypothetical example. We are not entering that at the moment, but this is also about how we can inset supply chains as well and get the food supply chains functioning better and rewarding the farms that they're sourcing from for better practice, all the way through to key infrastructure and utilities companies that are key beneficiaries of our activities, or we are a key risk to their infrastructure or utilities as farmers. We can be one as much as the other, and up until now, a lot of this uh, private businesses, insurance industry, and so on, have been effectively free riding the public purse, who have invested all this money into public subsidies to plant cover crops, to plant trees, to do this, to do that. And so it's our goal to make sure that we see some of those free riders put their hand in their pocket and fund, the protection of their assets, help reverse some of the flooding issues, help connect some of the habitats and make them better, as well as carbon capture and water quality. So how have we done that? Well, let's take one field. That's what we called it, because it's quite simply one field where we started everything. Now, lots of people will say, well, it shouldn't be arable in the first place. That is an arable field in a floodplain. That is a delta of sediment that has plumed across the field, probably the sediment from the field above, which you can just see a wet patch as in plough at the moment, or when that photo was taken, and has ended up in the neighbour's field. That field flooded 9 times in the last 2 years, I think. And that is a story all the way down the Evenlode. We do have still quite a lot under the plough or in cultivation in the floodplain, which frankly shouldn't really be like that. Now, there's nothing stopping those farmers doing that at the moment, and they're entitled to. At the moment, the way that the flooding is going, it's not likely to be making them a lot of money. So we are here to present a way out for some of these these cycles that our members are stuck in, to try and pay off the mortgage on the combine harvester, or to pay the bank loans on various other things, pay for the next order of fertilizer, and so on. Stuck in a cycle, there's no way out. But here is a wonderful example where this field is clearly not going to make a lot of winter wheat. So what can we do with it? Well, reconnect it to the floodplain, flood it intentionally, take a crop of grass off it, take a cut of lovely meadow grass, allow some of these floodplain meadow communities to re-establish, create some swales, some ponds, and wet up corners where the water wants to lie, enable that river to braid back through the field and carve some new channels, and just try and break up the flow as best as we can, take the energy out, take the sting out when that flood comes, because just downstream of here, that river, the Evenlode, smashes into the railway embankment at Matthews Mill, and is currently undercutting that embankment to quite a high risk to the infrastructure there. So that's one of our sort of exemplar project areas that we are looking to create a formula, create a blueprint that we can then cascade all the way down the river and up the river, as well as the sort of woody debris dams and the ponds, the swales, some tree planting where we've got really bad flow pathways and that need intercepting, and just generally this landscape approach. So we're not just having to redesign and have bespoke approaches to every field corner and edge, but actually have a modular approach. And this is one that we've probably all seen before, the Dawn at Blenheim, where some wonderful innovation and creativity pushed the river back out of the channel into the floodplain where it belongs, at high flows for half the year. It's out there. And in terms of, that's a lot of land to be taken out of production. Well, it's a grass permanent pasture. Not hugely productive in terms of grass quality and nutrition, but back in the drought, was it 2 years ago? That was the last green field on the entire Blenheim estate, and it pretty much had every sheep on the Blenheim estate there grazing it because it was the only grass that was left. So arguably, actually, a much more resilient system where you've got this nature and recovery that's going hand in hand with the farming system. Where are we now? So yes, this is the overview of how we're approaching it. There's in-channel river restoration, up catchment, looking at those woody debris dams, removal of obstructions and impoundments. Now, we're not taking that on per se ourselves, but we'll be looking to support all those, like Ewan, who's done a great job up at Bruin. reconnecting the river to the floodplain, as we've seen, and that could be what we're looking for here is the right place to deploy the smaller interventions, the lower cost interventions, rather than trying to shoehorn expensive interventions into the wrong place to do it. We're covering 5,000 hectares of this floodplain and the flow pathways, so we can really choose where those interventions go. Intercepting flow pathways, as I say, with woodland, but also potentially field corner bunds, these 3D buffer strips which are about to come out from DEFRA. The idea of just creating micro topography on a field edge, more perennial species to really intercept that flow, trap the sediment that's coming off the field, but also just slow that flow. Whilst we're doing this, that sounds very water focused. We are also targeting a few habitats and species, which will be our sort of signature for the project. So floodplain meadow restoration and grazing marsh as well. That's going to create wonderful biodiversity uplift and carbon capture, but also that re-wetting will enable a lot of our lost species to return to the even load, notably the curlew. We haven't had breeding curlew in the catchment for a long time, but they are still neighbouring catchments, so we are looking to bring them back. Eels, that's more of a blue sky aspirational thought. You know, that's going to take a lot of weir removal and or fish bypasses, not least at Cassington. But it's an aspiration to really have that natural longitudinal form back in the river. Water crow's foot, something which we can reverse sooner. Obviously, we need to improve the water quality, but getting some flow heterogeneity and we do have water crow's foot hanging on in the catchment, and so it's an easier place to start from. Water voles, we thought had disappeared from the catchment. There's a video that's been circulating in the ECP group of them from this spring, which is absolutely wonderful news. A brilliant, we're coordinating this with Beebout and their Join the Dots project, I think it's called, where there's a mink trapping effort to try and eradicate mink. And we're extending across the Windrush and the Evenlode and the Cherwell with them. So, you know, we've got some more aspirational than others. But that's where we're at with the species and the target habitats. And then of course trees. We need more shade, we need more shelter, we need more inception of runoff, we need more carbon captured. We need to think of other income streams as well. Should we be building almost exclusively from steel and bricks and mortar? Why aren't we using more timber? Why are we the second biggest importer of timber in the world after China? You know, that's ridiculous. We've got huge amounts of timber opportunity in our climate. So thinking about this, a landscape scale, thinking how we can manage woodlands better and bringing them back under more productive, not just in terms of timber production, but also wildlife carbon and other outputs. That is pretty much me. I mean, I'm not going to guide you through this slide, but it shows you that where we started was a pilot project with the carbon business, how we deployed that into the cluster, and then from that we've got various additional projects that have been stacking on top again. This is how we're structured. It's a growing team all the time, but the key to this structure is that the farmers are in total control. There's 3 directors there of this community interest company that are all farms. The cluster steering group is majority farmer led, but with some brilliant experts like Vicky Robinson and Victoria McNamara to bring in the skills from outside of our sector. And then within the landscape recovery, we've got a great steering group that then draws from our key stakeholders, of course, Even Low Catchment Partnership. I'm sat here in the Leverhulme Centre for Nature Recovery in Oxford. Network Rail have been pouring in resource to try and come up with these nature-based solutions. Rothamsted, I mentioned, Thames Water. And then, of course, because we are a pilot with landscape recovery, there's a lot of eyes on us from DEFRA and the Natural England and Environment Agency and Forestry Commission teams. But we can't do any of this without some serious help from finance and technical and legal and data management. This is all very novel and quite high risk, arguably, for farms to get involved with or green finance to invest in. So we need the best, arguably, out there. to build that confidence. And thankfully, because of the scale and the novelty of the project, there's been a lot of very kind support across all of that infographic. I'm going to wrap up any second now, but a quick touch on a couple of other projects. You can't plant 1,000 hectares of trees without thinking about what's going to eat them. Squirrels, major problem, but I'm not a big fan of 6-foot high fencing. So if we're going to have all these trees, we're going to manage the deer as well. It's a wonderfully nutritious and under valued meat that we're going to try and get into better supply chains. Other initiatives we've done, supplementary bird feeding. We've got 40 farms feeding over 60 tons of extra food for the winter in the Hungry Gap. That connects with a couple of other projects as well. What does a buyer want? Understand, using our finance team and legal team to understand how we contract with Thames Water or Network Rail or Oxfordshire County Council, so the risk and the burden isn't all on the farmer, but it's that can all be worked out together. How can this traditionally capital funded projects be extended out so it's a revenue payment for the ecosystem services they provide? A really interesting project on the Cherwell is bringing the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership and all the connectivity that they bring to finance and the wider players in this area to the farmers through Three Keel, who are doing an exploration of the market for nature-based solutions, and the Soil Exchange, which is a platform for measuring and creating a benchmark across all of these different nature-based solutions and natural capital. We've had some funding from the West Oxfordshire District Council to do a feasibility study on local abattoirs. They are an absolutely pivotal piece in the management of these grasslands, these species-rich grasslands. So we need to have that short supply chain, local production of rare and native breeds, which is so instrumental to that conservation effort. So it's a fundamental risk to us. We've managed to get some investment, and we are addressing that risk. Yes, lots of other things going on, tying in with Good Food Oxfordshire and trying to produce more food locally to local buyers, be it the hospitals, the universities, the schools. QR codes to improve communications to the community. And as I've mentioned, there's the Cherwell Farmers Cluster, which we've just started up. I will close now on this, which is we aren't just a project developer rushing around trying to benchmark everything and take it to market. This cluster and the nature of a cluster is all about bringing people together to exchange ideas, to bring people together to develop those projects, make sure that no one's left behind, that everyone's got access to the information they need. And that hive mind is instrumental to getting the shift and direction that we need for regenerating the landscape. So that's a snapshot of some of our events, and some of those are open to everyone, all our friends and stakeholders in the catchment. Some of them are exclusively just for members because there might be sensitive information, or it's sometimes farmers do clam up a bit when there's a big audience, so prefer the safe space of fellow farmers. Yes, so recapping on the strategy, hopefully that has given you a little taste of how we're approaching the landscape regeneration of the Evenlode, the Windrush, and the Cherwell, and hopefully appealed to you guys that might want to get involved or might think that we can support you. So yeah, and on that note, I think probably any questions.
Thank you so much, Tim. Yeah, we're going to open up the floor to questions. You can either type them in the chat box and one of us can read them out, or feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand and ask a question. Jennifer.
I always like to lead out. Tim, I'm really curious about the agroecology that you've got. Is that because I've been talking to various people, as I go through the community outreach, and I don't know where to lead people if they want to know about case studies. Is that something that you actually kind of capture so that other farmers can kind of look in and see if it's something they want to do?
That's a great question. So we set up agroecology with the Organic Research Centre and the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust in 2000 and was it 10? It seems like a long time ago. No, it wasn't there. It must have been later than that, but it was a long time ago. And it has continued with the Organic Research Centre hosting it. It is a brilliant source of information, and there will be a farm doing a case study which resembles your own farm, and but also some really interesting examples of how farms are working with their stakeholders, with their supply chains, with other sectors. So it's a brilliant place to go and look. We do have a sort of portal within the agroecology platform, which we upload some content to. We've not been very good at putting all of our case studies or projects up, but we need to, because we've just taken a little bit of philanthropy from the same people that have given some philanthropy to agroecology, on the condition that we start talking about it to others. So we will be putting more content up. And the other exciting thing is that agroecology is going to be, I think, hosting a cluster of clusters, a cluster of facilitators, where facilitators can exchange knowledge with one another as well, because every so often you're going to find that we're coming across the same problems and we need the same solutions, and so there'll be a bit of knowledge exchange there too.
Oh, that sounds really good. Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have to recreate the wheel every time, and if farmers, I think, can see an incentive, financial incentive and maybe a labor saving incentive to doing some of this natural restoration, why not? Provide that information. Is that something that's freely accessible, open to the public for their charge?
Yeah, agroecology is completely free to access. And the YouTube channel's got God knows how many videos on there of everything from biomass boilers to mob grazing and everything in between. So no, definitely worth a quick look. And I think a lot of the solutions that we need are quite niche skill sets. And actually, what I hope will happen is that you will find specialists, almost contracting services in graziers, in specialist kit that can go and cut meadows at the right time, lighter kit, or laying hedges, or hedge rolling, or whatever it might be. Services and creating new jobs locally for new entrants as well, because not every farmer is going to want to have to create his own 3D buffer strips, or her own hedge laying, or whatever it might be, or they're an arable farmer, they don't want stock, but they need those meadows grazed. So that's where that connectivity is really important.
Peter, I saw your hand raised. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tim, for a great talk. It was very informative. I've got a question really about community outreach, which is basically the area that we're sort of most involved in. I'm very much aware of all the terrific work that ECP are doing, but as a general question, how on earth do we actually reach people other than the preaching to the converted? Whenever we sort of organise events with or anything, we get lots of interest from people who are already actually bought into this thing. But how actually can we reach other people? And in fact, how potentially can the landowners and farmers actually assist with this? And I mean, one specific thing is obviously there's the issue of land access, which I know a lot of people who are not really bought into a lot of the wildlife things are very interested in accessing land, and that can be quite actually problematic. But I feel if we can actually work together somehow, there should be some potential. I wonder if you've got any sort of thoughts on, how farmers and landowners can assist in that area.
So part one of your question, it does feel sometimes like we are preaching to the choir a lot. Now, I mean, our penetration in the farming world has got to a critical mass where we're probably, I don't know, 70-odd% of 75% of the catchment. So we're over the bump, if you like, of just the converted. And but I think that's out of necessity for a lot of farms, that they've got to think about where their future payments are going to come from. In terms of community, it's a competitive world out there. We're competing with YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Costa Coffee, whatever. There's a whole lot of things that are vying for the attention of citizens nowadays. I see it in my children who are just 6 and 9 years old, that they're constantly being drawn like a moth to a flame by 101 things, not always what I would like them to be drawn to. And so it's how do we fight that? How do we be the fire? I mean, I think Clarkson's done a pretty good job, whether you agree to what he does or not. I mean, I see Rosie's face. But and it is mainstream what he's done. And so if you don't mind dancing with the devil, that's one way to go about it. I mean, there's lots of ways we can do this. We just have to be very creative. The QR code project that we've done, which has been with Ditchley and FarmEd and Rupert Ponsonby at Sarsden Glebe, to pilot how do QRs work if you stick them on a fence post, tell the story. But again, it's down to the content creation. It's got to be competitive with whatever podcast someone's listening to on their dog walk, or it's got to capture imagination. We're working with Network Rail. We've already been bouncing ideas around, like, that train line goes through the catchment. Why can't we tell a story on the back of every seat with a QR code as you drive past Pudlicott and explain why we've done what we've done? There's loads. Jack Knott really wants to have a vending machine in Charlbury Station where he can sell his venison to all the commuters. I think that we've got to get creative, and otherwise, yes, we'll remain talking to our own.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Rosie.
Yeah, I just want to say I think Tim Field has done far more for farming than Jeremy Clarkson, because most of the people that Clarkson's talking to are actually, the vast majority are actually, not going to be farmers. There's a small number of people I know he's engaged with, Andy Cato, etc. But I mean, I think he's the one doing the learning, not the teaching, in those cases. And anyway, I just going to vouch for the fact that, I've seen through the diversity of the events that the cluster puts on, that's what draws people in, and certainly, the farming family around here who are not obvious, you pretty much hooked them in, haven't you, Tim? They're kind of part of things now, and they wouldn't have been natural necessarily, they were pretty cynical about everything. So yeah, I think this is just a hymn of praise to Tim, really, but saying that I think it's very interesting, all the different events. If somebody doesn't just go for the sort of more mainstream ones, they might go to something on one of the smaller areas of interest, whether it's abattoirs or walnuts or something else, and that might but that there is an underlying philosophy that does seem to sort of permeate it all. So I've really enjoyed being part of it.
Thank you, Rosie.
Anne, did you have your hand raised?
I did. Sorry, I'm just trying to.
That's fine.
Again. Great, lovely to hear all the cantering overview, Tim, of all the wonderful work that you've been doing, and I'll just join Rosie in a hymn of praise. But at the same time, I'm also wondering how we get. One of the things I've always found most uplifting about the work that you're doing in an ECP context is it counteracts some of the negativity that we feel with, let's not go there at the moment, Rosie. I know you're on the call as well, but it's nice to hear about the positive things, not just the negative things going on within the catchment. And I just wondered how you envisage being able to take forward. Well, one of the things is, how do we monitor the biodiversity and improvements of that sort that you're making across the work of the cluster? And how do we report that to people? I was very inspired because Jen and I have been able to the big chalk last week, and hearing about all the things that were going on there. I mean, you couldn't not come back with a big smile on your face and feel that we've turned a corner. How do we bring that message out as well, with all the work that's been going on, to engage the public more again? Because I know they've got a lucky coincidence of things there, where they've got things like Stonehenge and various great big RSPB reserves, which we don't have. But on the other hand, we don't have a large number of tanks going around, so perhaps that's a benefit. You know, how can we collate monitoring data about the biodiversity across the and talk about that and share it in a really constructive way? Because it feels to me that's the love, that's the good news we want to share with everybody, rather than just the doom and gloom.
It's a brilliant question, and you know, I think whether it's good cop, bad cop, or what, it's a really, really valuable relationship to have people that are going to don't mind being the bad cop and calling it, but we really do need to be talking about solutions and not just the problems as well. And so that's one thing which having heard year after year after year of grumbles of how crap the crop is, or how expensive the fertilizer price is, or whatever else, I think a key message to farmer engagement is positivity. Talk about solutions. And I think yeah, in a sensitive way, right? Because you don't want to just gloss over all the problems. So I think that's one thing which I'm searching for. There's lots of people that are very focused on the challenges, and we need to be accountable, find the accountability in those challenges and so on. But I do believe that we do have some of the answers that we need to make work. Otherwise, what's the point? We're all going to end up underwater or cooking or whatever. So that's the first point. But thank you. The second point, and actually me saying that we're looking for the solutions, having just had the last couple of days that I've just had, trying to work out how we bring 7 reports into one coherent thread across blended finance plans, monitoring evaluation, land management plans, stakeholder engagement plans, governance, and I mean, it's just we're trying to bring all of this together for DEFRA as we close in on 2 years of project development, and we've had hiccups, but we're now trying to work out what the next step is, as opposed to find the problem, who caused the hiccup. And that part of the challenge there is keeping totally focused in what we need to do to get to the end of the 2 years. And that, unfortunately, has come at the cost of the amazing sweetie shop we walked into in terms of data. There is so much data out there. And one slide that I didn't have up there, because you guys are the ECP, or some of you are, you already know what you're doing. But I normally, when I'm presenting to non-ECP folk, have the ECP more than minutes visioning drawing of the landscape, because it really paints a lovely picture of all the activity that's going on in the catchment. And you know, whether it's Alison Smith at the university, or it's the riverfly monitoring, or it's the citizen science with the water quality testing. There is so much, the bird monitoring, there's so much data out there, and we are currently having to cut through what we need for this year against what we want going forward, and so that we can create that meta-analysis and plug in all of the, you know, the curlew sightings, the water vole sightings, but also the water quality challenges, you know, and we wanted actually ranunculus monitoring to be catchment scale by the citizen science. We've just not had the bandwidth to do it, but it's definitely something we want to work with the catchment to deliver.
And very quickly, Marcus, you've got your hand raised. We've got a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, bandwidth is a key one, and that's where I think community groups could help. And there's a challenge to us to get organised amongst ourselves and work out where we can help with bandwidth, particularly on things like species observations. I think we're making a good start. So we did a walk and brainstorm at Priory Farm a couple of months ago, which to me was a really promising start to understand what it's like to be a farmer, also what it's like to be a community group, where's the beneficial overlaps, how we can actually complement each other. I think that's a really important part of this jigsaw and can address Peter's points, Anne's points. There's lots of learning to do, a lot of organising to do, trying to somehow multiply the bandwidth by organising together, we can be synergistic.
Yeah. And I think Bird Aid's a lovely example of that, where we brought Bird Aid into, or we sort of in parallel brought our respective supplementary feeding projects together. So we're now supplying some of the feed to Bird Aid. But I think, we aren't creating all of the, or employing all of the people and everyone to deploy landscape recovery. We are going to be a very lean management machine that can deploy, hopefully, the funds to enable all of this to happen on the ground, or at least a bit of coordination. And we don't need to reinvent wheels where there's been hedge planting schemes going on before, or water quality measurement or anything else. It's just we just need to continue to talk. And now hopefully we'll get some bandwidth to be able to talk to you properly about how we go forward. But yes, Marcus, thank you for all your input to all of our meetings and stakeholder engagement, because it's been valuable.
Andy just quickly popped in the chat to say that the big chalk, which does include all of the Cotswold, which includes the Cotswolds and other limestone areas, is looking at simple and reproducible metrics for citizen science to work with. And that's using BTO, which is butterfly data across all the areas, and plant-like surveys. And so we could start maybe looking at that.
Thanks, Anne. I was hoping that we might be plugging in some of our carbon data into that at some point, because we have looked at some of the uplift in soil carbon through species richness and so on. So I am talking to Toby at Big Chalk, and of course Simon as well from CNL.
Well, what I'll do is, if we have any links anyone would like to share, then I can put that in a description on the video once it's published onto YouTube. This has been, I think, episode 5 of our Voices of the River webinar. So if you've missed any of the previous ones, feel free to jump onto our YouTube channel, look for @evenload, and you should be able to see our previous webinars there. We're also on social media, so follow us on there for any updates to our next webinars. But yeah, thank you so much, Tim. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and again, just expanding our knowledge. There's just so much going on. It's great to hear from the people involved what's going on.
Well, thanks very much for joining. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, we will see you all next time.